And they went and they sat in this park every day to pray. They would just go pray, 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 pray. One day while they were there praying, a stranger sat across from them in the park and began to speak to them. He goes, "Oh, hi, welcome. Are you from Paris?" And they said, "Oh, no, we're from out of town." And he began to ask questions. He said, "Where are you from?" And they said, "We're from Brussels." And he continued to talk, and he said, ask questions. He said, "What are you doing here?" They said, "Well, we're here on a retreat, on a holiday." And the guy kept asking more questions. He said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, we lead a church, a Christian church in Brussels." He goes, "Oh, is that right?" And he said, "Yes, we do." "Well, what's going on with your church?" They said, "Well, actually, the reason we're here is we're praying." And he said, "Praying for what?" You know, some people are nosy, you know, they want to know everything about your life, you know. He kept asking more questions. And Sosa and his wife were a little bit ashamed that he's telling him all this. They said, "Well, actually, we're trying to buy a building, and we're asking God to supply the money for this building." And the man said, "Well, that's a wonderful thing. I wish you well." And he gave them his business card, and he left. He said, "Enjoy your time in Paris." And he went away. So they exchanged business cards, and he disappears. Sosta and his wife went back home, and had 1 week left before the payment had to be made. 2 days before the deadline, the bank officer, where they had their banking business, called Pastor and said, "You need to come and meet with me right now." He went down and he said, "I don't know how to explain this to you, but there has been a deposit made to your account that was wired from a foreign account." Sosa said, "Do you mind telling me where the money was wired from?" He said, "Paris, France." How much? It was almost $1 million that was wired into the church's bank account.
Hallelujah.
Now, I still to this day, we don't know who that was. It could have been an angel. We don't know.
Yeah.
But all we know is it was a miracle. It was a provision, a divine supernatural provision.
Yes.
As a result of that, they were able to buy the building and even continue to rehabilitate it, remodel it. They're still there today. In fact, there's 8 different congregations meeting in that building today. There's a Russian church, there's a Romanian church, there's a French church, there's Belgian churches, and they're using it to the glory of God.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Still to this day, they face persecution from the local Muslims. They gather their children together for vacation Bible school, and the Muslim children are trained to go and to throw eggs at the kids. Can you imagine living in that situation? My point is what? They learn to trust God in the face of adversity. Let me ask you something tonight. What is your adversity? What are you facing in your life that's difficult? That is challenging, that seems as though there's no hope, no way out? I've got good news for you tonight. You can trust God.
Amen.
You can put your trust in Him. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. Trust God when life doesn't make sense. Trust God when you don't see the answers. Trust God when you face unexpected circumstances. Trust God with everything. Trust God's timing. Trust God when you face adversity. Let me give you a 4th lesson. I challenge you to trust God because of who He is.
Amen.
Trust God because of who He is. Psalm 118:8 says, "It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in men." Doesn't the psalmist also say, "Don't put your trust in horses and chariots, but in the Lord"? Trust in the Lord. Why? Why can't we trust God? There's all kinds of things that are calling for you to trust Him. There's all kinds of manufacturers and products and companies and advertisements that say, "Do this and we'll give you a better life. Come and do business with us, and we'll give you a better way of living. Come and do this. Promises being made right and left. But why can't we trust God? We've been betrayed. We've been disappointed. Right and left. But let me tell you something. When you put your trust in God, you put your trust in Him because of who He is. You see, it's because of God's attributes. It's because the God that we serve is a good God. It's because He is love. It's because He is all-powerful. It is because He is just. It is because He is sovereign. It's because He is a supernatural, extraordinary God who delights to show Himself strong for His people. The reason you can put your trust in Him is because of how strong He is.
Amen. Hallelujah.
You can trust Him because of who He is. I have a young couple in our church, and they were young married couple, only been married for 2 years. They became pregnant as an answer to prayer. John and his wife Ashley were 25 and 26 years old. She became pregnant, and after the first 3 months, the doctor said to them, "We need to terminate the pregnancy because there's something wrong with your unborn child. We're not sure exactly what's wrong, but we know things are not normal. We advise you to let us," it's funny how they have terminology now. "We want to terminate this pregnancy." They don't use the word abortion. They don't want to use the word murder. They don't want to use all those terms. We have to do this. And so, of course, John and Ashley were heartbroken. They asked more questions of the doctors. And they said, "This is what we tell you to do." They said, "Well, what would happen if we went to full term with this baby?" They said, "If you took the child to full term, first of all, we don't believe that you'll ever be able to take the baby to full term. You'll probably lose the child. But even if you have the child will be in some way not normal and will probably be born dead." Now, how many of you know that can be shocking news for parents, particularly young people who this is their first child? Their hearts were broken. They called their friends. They called me as their pastor. And they said, "What do we do?" And I said, "You guys have to begin to pray and seek God. This is a decision you have to make. I can give you my opinion, but you have to decide what you're going to do." And as I encouraged them and advised them, they began to pray and seek God. They went back for their next appointment to the doctor and said, "Will you please check again? We've been praying." And the doctor checked again and said, "There's been no change. You need to let us take that child." They said to the doctor, "We've made up our minds. If God gave us the child, God will have to take the child. We're not going to act like God. So we understand what you're telling us, but we're just going to trust God." The doctors tried their best to persuade them. All along during the pregnancy, at the end of 6 months, they said, "Things are not good. And they kept trying to pressure them. And they continued to say, "We're just going to trust God." She went full term and gave birth December the 9th. Let's see, it'd be almost 3 years ago. Gave birth to a little boy who didn't weigh very much. And the doctors had said, what they said is, "You probably won't have the child," but they gave birth to the boy. But he had serious issues. And that little child had 6 fingers on each hand, and had a hole in his heart, and had other conditions. And he was holding on, just holding on. The baby lived for 10 days. Every one of those 10 days, John and Ashley held that baby in their arms, loved him, thanked God for him. At the end of 10 days, the baby passed. I went and I did the memorial service for that family, and you can imagine the tears and the heartbreak and the pain and the sense of loss that those parents and their family members went through. Because in that situation, all you want to do is say, God, why? And today, if you were to talk to John and Ashley, what they would tell you is this. They would say, we still don't understand why our baby didn't live longer than 10 days. But we know one thing. We were able to get through it because we knew who God was. There are times we want to focus on what God does, but we need to focus on who He is. Are you hearing me? The Bible says that even when we are faithless, He is what? Faithful. Sometimes you run out of faith. Sometimes it seems as though you don't have any answers. But I'm here to tell you tonight, even in the midst of the most difficult circumstance, the reason you can put your trust in God is because of who He is. We serve a good God. Amen. We serve a loving God. Yeah. We serve a God that we can read about in the Bible, and nothing has changed Him. He is unchangeable.
Hallelujah.
Trusting God. Amen. With all of our heart, with all of our might, is the only answer. We need to put our trust in Him. Now, I have to be honest with you. I have asked myself this question many times. Why do we as Christians often fail the trust test? From the time that we were children, we were told to trust God. Why do we oftentimes fail the trust test? I know sometimes I do. So I have written down a few reasons why. For me, I can't speak for you. But I think sometimes the reason that I fail the trust test, and maybe you can relate to them. Let me read to you what I wrote. Because we're too self-sufficient. We are good at getting ourselves out of jams, so much so that sometimes we even short-circuit God's test. Sometimes we trust people rather than trusting God because they are present, physical, and visible. Sometimes we fail to trust God because we feel distant from God. Even Job would declare, though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. And you and I have cultivated many times the bad habits of worry and anxiety and fear. Many times we are better at worrying than we are trusting. We become very good worriers. But the only answer for worry is trust. One thing that I can promise every one of you today is this. As I close, listen carefully. Every day of your life, you're going to need to trust someone. Who's it going to be? You need to trust someone who is worthy and able to handle the weight of your life and your issues as you lean on Him. I mentioned a while ago that whenever I was a young Baptist boy, we learned the song Trust and Obey. There's another hymn that we learned that relates to the message tonight. And it's called Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. I don't know whether you ever sang it, but let me just read to you the chorus, may I? The one verse and the chorus. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. And the refrain goes like this: leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. Amen. When I stood on that diving board, looking at the deep end of the pool, I needed to trust someone. I needed to know that the arms of that guy that was in that pool waiting for me to jump, that he was able to hold me and keep me safe. The good news is that the arms, the ever